Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for zooming in today to this second Common Ground forum of the semester. As most of you know, the purpose of Common Ground is to get students who might not otherwise talk to each other, whether because of silos or reticence, to start having conversations and to start having those conversations about topics that they might not normally discuss. We usually do this in a small classroom setting, and we still will be doing that this spring. But the urgency of the conversations we hope to instigate is still with us this fall. So we're having a couple of these panel discussions to try to kickstart some conversations on campus. Before we get started, I want to mention that the Common Ground program has received wonderful support from many alumni and our board of trustees. We are very grateful for that. I want to take this chance to thank them for all their support, especially because we have two joining us today, Rich and Ronnie Klein. We really appreciate everything you're doing for the program, and we don't get a chance to thank you that often, so it's great to have that chance today. For you Zoom veterans, and who isn't a Zoom veteran these days, the chat will be open. When we have Common Ground in the classroom, we go over the Common Ground rules for our discussions, but those really just boil down to treating each other with mutual respect. So please participate in the chat with that golden rule in mind. In our first forum of the semester, we heard from members of the AU community who were inspired by the current social justice movement to read How to Be an Anti-Racist and think about the implications of that book for AU. Today, we want to explore some ramifications of the second of what people are calling twin pandemics, racism on the one hand and the spread of COVID-19 on the other. Cases of COVID-19 are once again rising sharply in this country, so this seems like a good moment to think about the impact of the virus on our society. The twin pandemics are not just happening at the same time. They are related in that the virus is highlighting inequalities in our society, some of which the social movements are addressing. Even as the virus itself seems not to distinguish among people as it searches for its next host, social conditions mean that certain groups in our society are more susceptible than others. Today, we have a panel of speakers who will help us understand some of the differential impacts of this COVID pandemic. Before turning to them, we want to get a sense of how the virus has impacted all of you. So we have a poll for you to take. We'll bring that up. This is a poll that you can answer in as many, or choose as many as you want from the list. I hope you can see all, there's about 10 options there. I'll give you a chance to look through that and click the ones that apply to you. All right, we're about 2/3 of the way there. We'll give another minute or half a minute or so. All right, last 5 seconds for your final clicks. Great, thank you all. So I'll share those now so we can all see them. You can see from the poll results how everyone has been impacted, in some pretty serious ways. I don't know, can you all scroll through yours, or do you have to wait for me to scroll? You can scroll your own. Okay, thanks, Dave. I see you shaking your head. It's interesting, that last one, the largest answer is that everyone had more opportunity to focus on things that are important to them. So There's people finding silver linings. We were talking about that earlier, right? In a tough situation. I'll leave that up there for a minute. Okay, great. So what we have is a panel, like I said before, of people who can help us understand some of these disparities in the impact of the virus a little better. And our first speaker is Yasmin Maddox. Yasmin is a 2007 graduate of Alfred. She was an outstanding student, I can tell you. She runs a startup called Architect, and Tech Rochester recently named her their Emerging Technology Professional Woman of the Year. I think I'll let her tell you about Architect because it's integral to what she'll be talking about today, which is the impact of COVID-19 on working parents and working mothers in particular. Yasmin, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just want to make a slight correction. Yasmin, the pronunciation, it's okay. It would have been Yasmin, as the story goes, if my maiden name were not Green. My mom was concerned with, I guess, schoolyard bullying, with that meanie greenier. I think that's how she put it. But great to be here. I am indeed the founder and CEO of a company called Architect, and we create web-based professional advancement tools for working parents, which can actually be used by all, but they're designed with the needs and aspirations of working parents in mind. I am married to my college sweetheart, who did not have the good fortune to go to Alfred University, but he had the good fortune to go to college in Alfred. He went to Alfred State across the road, and we have 3 daughters that we are raising, ages 7, 5, and 2. And sorry, 3, as my mother just reminded me. Our 2-year-old turned 3 last Friday. I put that information forth for 2 reasons, I guess, in context for what I'm going to be saying, and also because I'm still tired. I am perpetually tired, as I think most, if not all, parents are, whether you are working, out of the home, in what used to be the traditional sense or not. So with that said, I am actually going to, hopefully, Bob, if you can temporarily make me a host, I can share my screen.
Okay. We'll bring you up here. Okay.
Okay, let me
Be a
see.
co-host now.
Thank you. Okay. So the impacts of COVID-19 on working parents, and again, working is in parentheses in this case, without getting too much into it. Previously there and still is a discussion on what it means to be a working parent, whether you work outside of the home, again in the traditional sense, or whether you are a stay-at-home parent. But I think, if nothing else, COVID's impacts have really impacted all parents in a variety of ways. I'll touch upon those who were stay-at-home parents, just a smidge, primarily looking at those who are, working parents, who are employees or who are self-employed. So what is there to say about COVID-19's impacts on all people, or certainly most people, but really specifically parents, is that it was a trauma, right? It was a traumatic experience. But I think, at least from my perspective, before that trauma, there was first intrigue. I don't know if you all can remember that far back to mid-March, but I will probably never forget the fact that it was Friday the 13th of March. There were some rumblings about, case rates exploding all over for COVID. And Governor Cuomo had not yet made a decision about schools, especially schools in New York City, because that was a source of a lot of contention between Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio. And so, as many parents were, I was looking at everything that I could find. And ultimately, that intrigue again went back to what we all found out, which was that it was a trauma we were experiencing. Though COVID certainly is a virus, a biological phenomenon, really it's been an assault or an attack on people's sense of normalcy, their routines, and their ability to deal with continual uncertainty and restrictions, especially those of the sort, like I'm going to call it physical distancing, because I think from right out the gate when we called it social distancing, it became very unpalatable to a lot of people because socialization is so fundamental to who we are as human beings. So this is not a picture of my child. This is a picture of a very adorable kid. But pretty much this was the look that my oldest child, who was the only one at that time who was in school, who was in first grade, this is what she looked like, okay? I remember she got off the bus, came running down the driveway. I had gotten the text alerts and everything about how, she had been packed away with a number of learning materials in the off chance, as was conveyed to me, that they would not return on Monday, right? Apparently, at least as we thought back then, for 14 days. Clearly, that is not what happened. And the immediate effects, I won't sugarcoat it, were adverse. They were negative. Starting the following week of March 16th, we had 4 major whammies that impacted working parents. There was the impact on our routines. And when we talk about disparities, we have to talk about the routines of those that were relatively stress-free, to put together, those who had a lot of support systems and financial resources and other resources, as well as those that were, to use the term, unstable, those who were continually trying to find people to watch their children so that they could go to work, so that they would not lose a day's pay or even their job. There was, of course, the problems that were decades in the making regarding childcare, both among providers and the overall childcare market, and what we know to be realities within the K through 12 education system in terms of those kids who have and those kids who do not have the same resources that those who are more well off or better off have. So there was unprecedented pressure on an already unstable infrastructure. And then, of course, for some of the most vulnerable among us, elder safety, at the same time that it was being drilled into us that we needed to, be distancing ourselves, be protecting those who are most vulnerable, those in high risk categories, including our elders, like our parents and grandparents. Those who did not have the support needed for childcare had to rely on those very people to keep their jobs. And so parents were in an impossible and unjust situation. And then, of course, there was a lack of rest, right? People were surely sleeping, but nobody was really resting. And certainly working parents were not resting. There was insufficient, or there was a lack of sufficient and welcome rest from the uncertainty and anxiety that was going on. And of course, at the heart of what Architect does, it was really an attack on the immense gains that had been made with respect to women's careers over the last 40 plus years. From mid-April to August, the uncertainty, ran the gamut from women and men, but especially working mothers losing their jobs, having various setbacks in terms of professional development opportunities that dried up, especially for those who may have been in academia, in terms of conferences that were postponed, which we all know was not just a matter of postponing conferences, but also postponing the ability of academics to present work that they had spent a lot of time on. And the continuing effects, while they still suck, if I could use that term and be honest, we've started to get to a point of resilience, and there is room or hope for optimism. Our routines and norms have adapted. We are more flexible with our work schedules, professional norms, even though I have, as I mentioned earlier, crisp software, which cancels out the side noise, the noise of my, or background noise, the noise of my kids. People are more relaxed, something that perhaps we should have been all along. With regard to childcare, providers in the market, and K through 12 education, we have now an evaluation of childcare infrastructure and the out of whack unit economics that have harmed providers and families for years really being taken seriously. It's sad to say, but once everybody found out, oh yeah, people really can't go to work if they don't have anybody to watch their infant or their child, we started taking things more seriously as a collective. And then, of course, the political attention on the digital divide has been greater. And with it, there's been subsequent innovation, especially to help kids with their education. What we found through Architect especially is that there's been really a centralization of what we refer to as work-life information. The whole idea of work-life balance and integration used to be really the stuff of feel good, pep up your work base, employee lunches and such. They were looked at as luxuries. But ever since March, they were undeniably looked at as necessities for a lot of reasons. We have four core things going on. We have the democratization of information. So there is the rapid sharing of checklists, legal counsel in some cases, tips that are shared through Facebook groups and Instagram posts to help people that transcends social and class or socioeconomic groups. We have mental health resources and mental health awareness that has always been bubbling beneath the surface, but is now gotten new prominence because people are losing their minds to varying degrees. And I say that in jest, but I also say that seriously. There's been widespread renewed civic action, more focus on local politics. I remember from not only, Bob Stein's classes, but, Jeff Slider Beltrow's classes, all politics is local. And so because of what was going on and still is going on with schools, people are now understanding, oh gosh, it's not just a presidential election that's important. It's also my local school board election. And then, of course, virtual and traditional childcare innovation has really ticked up a bit. Architect runs a mastermind group, and the last group session we had on an innovator in the virtual childcare space, who was able to speak with a childcare provider, a Main Street provider, if you would like to call her that, from Buffalo, who has been facing certain death, so to speak, in terms of her business. And they had an opportunity to really work out the finer details of what works and what doesn't. A type of collision that would have never happened, unfortunately, prior to COVID. We've been looking at how families are working on these logistics of what it's like. I'll show you perhaps type A, but my husband and I had to put this decision tree together to make sense of how we were going to tackle our two older daughters going to school, either in a morning or afternoon cohort, and what would be the red flags for us to pull them out of school if need be based on case rates. And on the careers of working mothers, the stats are gloomy, right? So roughly 60% and counting of jobs eliminated by COVID-related separations, both layoffs and permanent terminations, were jobs held by women, many of whom were moms. And if I make nothing else clearer, I want to make explicitly clear that the backslide of women's careers is not, it is a jobs issue, but it's fundamentally a multifaceted generational issue. There is the issue of lost productivity by incredibly talented working mothers. There is the financial losses that are incurred by families, meaning they are less self-sufficient. They are less harmonious when you have situations in two-family households or single-family households where there are serious financial issues. You have identity issues for the millions of women who grew up, especially older millennials like myself, who grew up thinking that they could do whatever they wanted, be whatever they wanted to be. And then, of course, there's the aspirational issues. We have kids watching what we're doing. We have little boys, little girls who are seeing these disparities play out. So what does that mean? Not so much for us now, but out into the future in terms of what our kids could see as being possible. And as Langston Hughes' poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, I don't know, but Architect and those that I know and work with don't plan to find out, right? So really, in summation on the careers of working mothers, we've been working on preventing this backslide by helping working families, especially working moms, take a few concrete steps. One, to scan your environment for a better understanding of who constitutes the village, aka your support network. To do individual and collective SWOT analyses, to bring in a business term, to put in place a plan of who can tackle which tasks based on skills, schedules, and interest. So, you know, pretty much people are finding out, we're finding out that we have to rely on each other in new ways. Let's make the best of it. Let's do it intentionally with really thoughtful planning. Familiarize yourself with employment rights as an individual, including what constitutes caregiver discrimination, something that so many working parents have no clue even exists in terms of what rights they have. Complete a professional development plan that takes into account your career and family life cycle and your network. So don't just think about what you want to achieve in the next 6 months, but go all the way out as much as your imagination can take you in terms of what you hope to accomplish and what that means in terms of your family obligations and aspirations. And then ultimately execute on your plan and assess it on a quarterly basis. It's going to take immense work, but we've seen working mothers start to do this and start to claw back on some of these absolutely absurd and terrible setbacks. And there we are, a community.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much, Yasmin. It seems like wonderful work that the company's doing.
Thanks.
Okay, I mentioned at the beginning that we have wonderful support from our Board of Trustees, and here's an example of that. One of our newest Board of Trustees members is Brian Hill. Brian Hill is a 1990 graduate of Alfred University in public administration, and he's had a really successful career in government administration. He's now the county executive for Fairfax County, Virginia, which means he's right in the middle of COVID policy making, because the counties have really borne the brunt of a lot of the policy making. So we really appreciate his taking some time from his day, which must be incredibly busy, to tell us about some of the impacts for policymakers. Brian.
Thank you for that introduction. Again, you said I was a graduate of 1990. I was on the 5.5-year plan. What I saw from Yasmin, you don't let an old guy follow a young person, because that is not the way to do it in this world. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, but I do have some talking points. And first and foremost, I really want to say thank you for allowing me this opportunity. And I hope everyone is well. COVID is an interesting topic. It's an interesting thing. Close to the White House, I have to deal with numerous situations that involve COVID. In Fairfax County, we have basically taken the concept to box it in. I look at Fairfax County as a great place to live, learn, work, and play, but persistent racial and social inequities and disparities still do exist, and we have to deal with those disparities. The racial and social inequities and disparities are even more apparent as we see the impact of COVID-19. Our community is suffering from the lack of what I want to say a national strategy, but we have a strategy in Fairfax. We have COVID rates that are below 4% per 1,000 of our population, which is amazing for a population of 1.2 million people. That being said, we're led by Chairman Jeff McKay. He's a James Madison graduate, so he didn't go to the proper school, and I tease him about that all the time. His purple is not as purple as our purple. In 2016, he put forth a edict of doing a One Fairfax policy, the belief that all residents deserve an opportunity to succeed. Our county has committed to considering equity as we create and implement county policy and practice to intentionally and comprehensively, as well as systematically identify and address barriers to the gaps that create opportunities. I became the county executive in 2018, January 2nd, And my first task was to implement One Fairfax. They had a goal of One Fairfax, but they did not have a strategy to implement it. We have now a strategic plan that cross-pollination throughout our community as well as our departments to understand what equity, access and equity actually is. Now let's talk a little bit about COVID. While anyone can contract COVID, we acknowledge that social and economic conditions in the community are making some people more vulnerable to the effects and the disease that COVID is. Unfortunately for Fairfax, like many other communities, we see disproportionate impacts to the Latino community. What is interesting about that statement is in the beginning of COVID, in March, April, May, and June, the Caucasian population was a 55% positivity rate in Fairfax County. Asians were 30, African Americans were 10, and Latinos were 10. I think my math is correct. I think that comes up close to 100. If it doesn't, it wasn't because of Alfred, it's because I'm very tired. What has happened and transpired? Long-term care facilities. You're in an affluent community. You have a lot of long-term care facilities. We have had 70% of our population of those long-term care facilities, when you take the total number of deaths, have been in those long-term care facilities, but they have not been Latinos, they have not been African Americans, they have been Caucasians, because they have the ability to spend and be able to pay for those long-term care facilities. So that was the first 3 to 4 months of COVID. Since then, we've had situations where the African American population has gone up in COVID. The Latino population is now at about 48% positivity rate when you look at our population. But what's more important is the ability to have hospitals that can handle the COVID-19, hear me now, 20 and 21. I call it COVID-60. I do my podcast every week. I podcast to my team of 15,000 employees. Guys, we have to plan for COVID-60. So my team now is understanding that COVID-60, which might turn to COVID-82, because I'm almost on the cusp of adding 22 to this scenario, because we, again, do not have a strategy to help mitigate COVID. If you look at Europe, they've done it pretty well, but now they're going through phase 2. England, where I grew up as a child, is basically shutting down the northern portion of England, and the Prime Minister is getting his proverbial, you know what, handed to him. In Fairfax County, we have 400 contact tracers in a 400 square mile area that basically shrinks community spread. I'm going to say this to everybody on this call. There is no way you can stop COVID. There's no way you can stop it. But when you get one case, just one case, the deal is, how do you prevent that case turning into 2 cases? And that's what we've done quite well with our teams here. Why it's important? Because we have a lot of community members who don't have the access and equity. They work in public-facing jobs where physical distancing is not practical, and we have to understand that. You have that in Alfred University, you have that in California, you have that in Virginia. You have to remember that we still have an economy and we have public-facing jobs, and there's people that do things that you on this call will probably never do because of your academic and your educational levels. They have experienced job loss of income. We are somewhat insulated here in Fairfax County. My job unemployment rate prior to COVID was like 2%. I'm about 8.7%. Well, that increase is adversely affecting folks that look like me, folks that are Latino, folks that have a lower educational aspiration in the past. Those are the people that are generally impacted because they cannot work from home. Live in situations with the ability to self-isolate. We have a very high cost of living in Fairfax County. if there's 15 people living in a home and there's 3 families, there's a high likelihood that somebody in that family is going to provide them with an opportunity to attract COVID. That is just a simple scenario that we have here in Fairfax County. I have 161 different languages in our public school system. You can imagine about how these folks get together and are unable to self-isolate. The bigger problem that we also see is the lack of health insurance or a primary caregiver. My mother is very lucky. She lives with me. She's 84 years old. She has not kissed me or hugged me in 8 months because she said I have COVID, because I have to go to work every day. Since March 14th, I have not left this office, it feels like. Yasmin talks about being tired. I have 3 boys. Luckily, they're all 19, 20, and 24, but I think I'm more tired today not dealing with them than I am because of COVID. So we always have to get our mental capacity together. Mental health is a big deal with COVID. You staying at home and self-isolating and not talking to people. Zoom made a lot of money because of this platform. What they haven't realized is I'd rather look at you and talk to you face to face. I'm an old guy. I'd rather see you in the room with me than on these calls, because I don't know, and as you know, I don't know if everybody's wearing pants or not. I just want to make sure that everybody can talk to us and